Forge Studio Warlord unboxing series. I'm Rich, and here we are with part of the body of the Warlord. If you've been following the rest of our series, you'll notice that we've done the shoulder weapons, the head, the arm weapons, and this is now where we start to move into some of the bigger components, as you can probably see from the giant red box sitting on the desk here. This, for the most part, is a mixture of some of the frame parts, some of the body parts, and mostly this is the upper of the Warlord itself, including the shoulder plates, the sort of chest, torso plates, and the upper sections. Doesn't really include any of the lower bits, although I think there may be some of the lowercase frame bits hidden within this in this box, given that I have checked the majority of the parts over to make sure there was nothing that would warrant a return to Forgeworld. So let's jump in, crack open this big box, get all the bags out and have a look inside. So as you can see here, outside of the box, it probably actually looks a little bit like there's more in here than could fit in that box, and to be honest, that's how it felt. There's quite a lot of bits crammed in here, so I'm going to break these apart into smaller sections and go through them in little bits as and when. Nowhere else really to start other than the top of the pile, and I'll pick one of these bags and just start to have a little look through in sequence of what all the bits look like and how they are. So straight away, I'm going to look at this piece. This is the section that sort of sits above the head on the torso section of the Titan itself. You'll notice straight away there is not much wrong with this, but you can see there's a deviation on the right hand side of the section as we look at it here. It isn't naturally curved, it's kind of warped out of shape. There's no problem really whatsoever. A little bit of heat will treat that. There's some sort of little bits of sort of fraying on the edges, but other than that, this is just a fairly standard deformed piece of what we have for the carapace and the sort of the armor plating for the top. It's fairly slim, so this should just deal with in the usual way of remolding Forgeworld parts in terms of a bit of heat treatment, a bit of water, or a hairdryer if that's the way you want to go. So on to the next piece here, and this is another armor panel, I believe, and this might actually be a part of the front. Yes, it is. In fact, no, it's not. Sorry, stand corrected. This is the base plate for the torso that will sit on the hip joint and will pivot on the legs. As you can see by this giant opening, there's a nice solid surface for that to sit on, and at first glance you can see there's some subtle warping from the back section there. Again, that shouldn't take too much. You can actually see the way this has obviously been sat in a warehouse for quite some time, and some of the bubble wrappers sort of made patterns on the resin, but other than that, it's not too greasy. There's a little bit of patina, like I say, from the bubble wrap. Overall, this piece is fairly straightforward and is definitely well within the boundaries of acceptable and understandable from a large section like this. The gates look fine, everything else looks fine. I'm happy with that. So move over to one of the slightly smaller bags on the right, and this, if you can tell from immediately looking at it, if you've built an AT scale Warlord Titan or built one of these yourself, in fact, this is what looks like one of the side panels of the torso, and this will be where the side armor panels that kind of wrap around what would perhaps be the ribs or waist of the Warlord, and this will just sort of sit on one side there. I don't really think there's anything wrong with this. I think there's a slight sort of mismatch of the mold there. There's a few little scraps here and there that will scrape off or sand down or file down with no real problems. As you probably saw from the top and the bottom, there's a slight curve. I'm not really sure at this point if that's part of the design or if that's just slight warping that I'll need to get rid of, and we'll find that out during the dry fit. This is the top center section where the void sort of carapace pieces will go. This will sit in the middle of the top of the body. You can see there from the sort of the very kind of recognizable armor plating that you see on some of the knights and some of the other titans, and this actually looks like the resin gates have come off of this or have been taken off of this pre-packaging. Sometimes this can be a problem. I don't think in this case it will be a particular issue. The the gates look to have come off relatively cleanly. They're not in the box with the rest of the Titan, so that leads me to believe this was sort of something that happened during packaging or pre-packaging. As you can see from the rest of it, we're looking fairly okay. It could have been quite a heavy piece, that, but you can see from the lines they haven't filled it in with solid resin, which is probably good for the center of gravity on this, what is already going to be quite a large, heavy model. This looks like one of two sections that is part of the upper of the torso section. You can see there from the bottom left, on the cabling, there's a little bit of the sort of flash that we see that I mentioned in one of the other videos that gets a little bit frustrating, but looks like it should come out nice and cleanly with no real problems. This all looks fairly straight, smooth, fairly straightforward. Not a lot to deal with on this. This piece looks almost identical in terms of the same little bit of flash. You can sort of see that sheen and that patina again from the bubble wrap, potentially just indicating that this has been sat for quite some time. I guess this is one of their most expensive kits, and I don't imagine they sell a huge amount of these very close together, so this could have been sat for quite some time. But again, this piece looks fine. It's all superficial. There's just a few little bits that will need correcting at some point. Moving on then to the last couple of bits we have here. We've got what I believe is the sort of entrance way for the back of the torso section. Any of you, again, that have built an AT scale one, you'll sort of see that there's this access hatch at the back rear section of the torso. This all looks fairly straightforward. It looks like quite a nice piece, actually. I may even do a series on trying to cast this for use in things like Necromunda and other sorts of Zone Mortalis base builds, kind of scenic pieces, because it's quite cool, but we'll have to see how that goes in a separate video. Hit up with a comment if you think that would be a good idea and you'd like to see that. And then this looks to be, yes, this is what I thought it was. This is the centerpieces of both of the feet. As I said, in the majority of this box we've got the sort of the torso and the panels, but for whatever reason the centerpieces of the feet are in this section. These are fairly thick, sturdy sections of resin. You can see there's a few little bits of sort of miscasting, sort of slippage with the molds. I don't think it's a huge problem. These, in fairness, are probably going to be, manipulated around quite a bit with the toes, made into part of a base, a scenic base, because of course you can't just have a Warlord stood on its own like it's doing nothing. So they'll be weathered to hell, there'll be mud, there'll be chips and scratches and stuff. So unless there's any major damage to these types of pieces, it's generally not worth worrying about. These can be dealt with in really simple, quick, easy ways, whether you want to completely trim them down or just cover them up with weathering and paint. Happy with these overall, so we'll move on. Get some of these pieces out of the way and move on to some of the other bits we've got in some of the other bags. And I think this is more armor panels. These look like the sort of the side rear sections of the armor panels. Again, anyone who's seen a Warlord or has seen the armor panels know that there's 3 that wrap around each shoulder. First thing we notice on this is that the resin gates look to have sort of snapped off in a little bit. Sometimes this can be a concern. When this happens, it can take chunks of the actual detailing out. It can take chunks off the model. I think a combination of fairly clean breaks on the resin gates here and them being kind of on edges of sections that don't really have a huge amount of detail means that they'll be easy to salvage. And in the light here you can just sort of see the print lines or the mold lines that has perhaps come through from the prototype that had been printed out or what have you. But again, that's all fairly easy to sort of smooth over or paint out, so not massively concerned with any of that. On this section we look to have basically the same sorts of concerns, but the resin gate hasn't actually snapped off this. It all looks still intact. No sheen, or not much sheen, to these pieces at all. Fairly smooth edges. Yeah, not really a lot to say about those. They're fairly straightforward. So moving on to the next piece, I think this is 2 of the other sort of, this is the mid sections of those 3 plate sort of wraparound sections. The frustrating thing about this kit is compared to the AT kit, you only get one variant of this. and that is this bit with the giant Titanicus symbol on it. For the purposes of my modelling, I might actually prefer this to be a smooth section with no detailing on, so I can put, you know, sort of a few decals, transfers, weathering, all those sorts of things on. And with my Warhound, I have previously dremeled off and filed down a lot of this this extra detail that I didn't really want. I'm not sure whether I'm going to decide to do that with this at this point, given the scale and the price of this piece. I don't really want to mess it up, if I'm completely honest with you. So we'll have a little look at that and sort of weigh up the cost benefits. I might just leave it and sort of live with it, given that I am planning to go with a Traitor Legion for this. Other than that, the piece looks fairly solid. There's not much issue with it. And it's the same with this. The same issue, it's a nice big smooth panel. I don't think there's much warpage on this, just looking at this. I think there might be, you know, sort of some slight sections that need sort of pulling out here and there. But I think that mounting rib on the back of the panel actually makes these pieces a little bit more sturdy. So there's not too much to do. And actually the way these panels overlap, not a huge amount of those panels will actually be visible apart from sort of the main central section. And then this is the sort of the bit to complete those wraparound sections, and this is the front armor panel, as you can see, with the mounting plate for the mounting ball, sorry, for the tilt plates that will go either side of the head on the fronts of the shoulders. No problems that I can see with this so far. I think there's, you know, a little bit of slippage on that left hand edge of the outside of the armor panel. A little bit of greasy feeling to this, not too much. It's all going to get a soak and a scrub anyway. Again, if anyone watching this wants to sort of see that process for how to pre-treat and kind of prepare Forgeworld resin for gluing and painting and all those sorts of things, we can certainly do a video on that if there's a desire to see that, and if you want to stick that in the comments below. On to the second one, the right hand side or left hand side, as you would look at the Titan from the front. No major issues, but a little bit of flash on the edges, as we've seen with some of the other pieces. And in this little baggie, we've got a bit of an outlier, and this is another instance of a resin gate having come off without it being in the package. So of course this has come off either in packaging or before packaging. This hasn't been included when it's all been wrapped up, but this is the another side of the torso sort of central section that we started to unbag bits of earlier. And although we've got some rough edges on this, you might be able to see there's a little bit of the detail of the actual piece has come off on this, but the majority of it is above the level of the detail, meaning we can cut, file, trim that down. But here you can just sort of see this edge, this inside edge of the piece. I don't really think, given the scale of the amount of edges and sections that we're going to have to glue on this, that's going to be a problem, but we'll work through it as we do the dry fit, and we'll have a look to see if that's going to have an impact. If it will, I'll be able to just fill that with a little bit of putty. It's not a big problem, and it's well within my personal boundaries of what I'm willing to accept on a piece like this. And into what I believe is the last little bit that we have out of this section of stuff to work through, and is the front plate. The plate where the head will mount, with the little sort of chest armor plate mounting just below that, as you can see. This is a fairly thick, sturdy piece. This is going to be where the head, our Warlord, Warhammer World exclusive head, is going to mount. The one that was the first section of our unboxing series. And yeah, no real problems with this. This is a fairly big, chunky section. There's a lot of reinforcing parts to this, so I think this would be really frustrating if this had have actually warped or moulded. There's a little bit of slippage between that top section there. Probably have to file that down a little bit just to make sure all the pieces fit together properly, but again, that's why we do the dry fit, to make sure if there are any issues, we can remold pieces where we need to, we can file bits down, we can gap fill, all those kinds of usual things that you would expect to have to do, putting up with and putting together one of these Forgeworld models. But overall, the detail's really nice on this. It's really crisp, it's not greasy. I'm happy with this, so we'll move on. So as you can see, we've cleared the table down and we've got some of the bags out with some of the smaller detail pieces, and we're just going to dive straight in. This is where they're the smaller bits that you probably don't want to be leaving lying out, and this is where you can start to see we're seeing what we might call the connective tissue. So these great big sockets, these ball joints as part of the sockets. I don't know, having not really properly looked through the instructions at this point, but I believe they're to do with the leg mounts. And these are the sort of cuffs that will go over those, I believe, to allow the cables and the pistons all to sort of slot into place and make that joint a little bit tougher. As you can see, they slot together quite nicely. There's no real issues on any of these, I don't think. These ball joints are, huge chunks of solid resin. There's a little bit of a line underneath them, but I think it should all still fit really neatly together. So we'll have a look at these socket joints, and typically these can be the sorts of things, because you've got that circular detail in the middle, you've got the socket detail on the outside. These can be pieces that typically can experience slippage in a few cases and cause a few issues. Looking at these so far, I think the first one had a little bit of that slippage, but the second one looks completely fine. And given the nature of where that would go, I'm not sure it'd be a problem. These, I believe, are part of the mounting brackets for the weapon arms. That will connect the arms themselves to the body. Again, a little bit of slippage on this detail here, and this will be a case of trying to clean this up and work out which edge we want to be the leading edge, i.e. facing forward on the Titan, because that's the piece that people will see first. But a dry fit will see how much of this is actually on display and how much we need to fix and to what sort of standard. But both of these arm brackets look to have suffered the same fate in terms of slippage, so it might just be that depending on how that goes, we have a little email to Forgeworld and just sort of say you might want to keep an eye on this in the future and wait for them to completely ignore me, of course. These pieces look completely out of place given the rest of it. But again, anyone who has built an AT scale Warlord will know that these pieces go in the sort of like the pinning section on the outside of the hip or upper leg kind of leg socket connector piece, and I think they're just an added detail, a little bit of a sort of gyro type thing. They look quite cool, and again I might try and cast some bits of those up just for use on terrain pieces and such. These look like little connective sort of nubbins, we'll call them. I don't really know what they're called at this point, for some of the pistons and such that will go on the leg mounts between the hip joint and the legs themselves. Some of the actual piston pieces you can see, these little bits, as you might have seen if you've watched the other video of unboxing, these sort of smaller piston bits tend to get churned out a bit quicker because there's a few of them compared to some of the bigger pieces, and you've got slippage pretty much across all the ones of these that I can see that have come out of this bag. I don't think it's a huge problem. It's straight line stuff on a curved surface. A really sharp scalpel should solve that fairly smoothly and quickly. No major problems. These are some of the dual part pistons, and as you can see, the exact same problems that I spoke about in the previous video, and this is across all of these types of pistons that I've seen on any Forgeworld kit that I've actually had. This problem remains across all of these items. Whether they've tried to squeeze too many onto the same resin gate, whether they just need to pay a little bit more closer attention to, kind of how the molds stick together. You can see in particular on the actual piston part of this, that's quite a lip. Although it's not, kind of damage, it's not game ending, that is a significant slip. But of course, this is, kind of a section that will slot into another section and will become a minor part of the Titan. But this is, I'll be honest, really annoying. These parts are so fiddly, there's that many of them that it becomes a bit of a nose when you have so many of them that have this same type of slippage, and it remains one of my biggest personal bugbears with some of the Forgeworld kits of this type. I don't think it'll be huge, but across both of these big boxes, because there's another one to come in a separate video, and all of these bags, there's a lot of these types of ball joints and these sort of pistons, and yeah, it gets really annoying. These little bits, I don't really know what they are, but they look fine. Both sections, I'm not sure if they're to do with sort of, just sort of covering off gaps and holes on some of the torso joints. As you can see, flash and a little bit of slippage on these sort of piston joints. Nothing quite as bad as the one I laboured on a little bit at the end there of the first bit. But yeah, all these sorts of little pieces, you tend to find that there's a few problems, minor problems, that just need a little bit of attention before you start trying to throw everything together. Looks like the defensive Mauler bolt cannons, or whatever they're called on the Axiom defense battery, whatever it's called on the Warlord. fairly straightforward, not much detail. Look pretty much the same as the Castellax smaller bolt cannons that you get for the Mechanicum. Out of this bag, I think, yeah, probably the biggest issue for me is these piston joints. They're just an absolute pain when you have this sort of level of sort of slippage, I guess we'll call it. It's not game ending. It grinds my gears, to quote Peter Griffin. We'll deal with that, and it might be that we use these pieces as part of the, kind of how to deal with Forgeworld resin as you're building kits. Again, if that's something you want to see, just comment ahead, or let us know if there's a preferred method you would like to share or like us to see use in terms of dealing with those sorts of problems on the kits. So we'll delve into this next bag. As you can see, it looks like a complete random assortment of parts again. These pieces look like they're off the back side of the void sort of arcs that go over the top, the very top of the Warlord carapace. Again, these fit almost the same as they would on the AT Warlord scale Titan. Little bit of slippage around the edge of these, as you can see from the sort of the gaps around the edges. These look like they're supposed to just slot into place. So the nature of that slippage on the edge might actually turn out to be no real problem at all. It could also mean that they need filing down to make sure these pieces fit snugly and smoothly, so we don't have any problems. Nice looking bits of kit, fairly straightforward. These are actually probably fairly good candidates for me to do some casting on, because I think these would look really cool on wall sections or floor sections of some sort of Zone Mortalis, Necromunda type terrain. And actually I've done a couple of molds of these sorts of things in the past, so I think that'll be something that we look to cast up before we build this whole section. Some of the mounting sections, I think these might actually be the mounting brackets for the Mauler cannons that we saw previously. These look like the armor panels from the mid sections of the toes on the feet. Again, no problems with these. I'm really glad that these come in separate pieces rather than just molded to the foot, because we can change the shape and the pattern of that foot as we want to step it over something, because I do have quite a creative plan for a display base for this, and whether that goes into some sort of studio entry to Golden Demon in the future, we can but hope and dream. Moving on into some of the other parts we've got here. Again, more mounting brackets. I think this is to do with some of the defensive batteries. You can probably see through the video there that there's what looks like a las cannon in the background. Similar, I think, to the Mauler cannons there. These look like the void nubbins, the void shield sections. For whatever reason, I got 3 sprues with these on and then 2 in a little plastic baggie. Again, that might be that during packaging they sort of came off and were packaged neatly up to make sure they didn't go missing, but it is what it is. And these are the las cannon defensive arrays that look like they fit onto one of those mounting brackets that we saw earlier. Little bits of slippage, and you can sort of see there's a bend in these las cannons. One is worse than the other. Fairly straightforward stuff, and anyone who's ever bought a Forgeworld tank probably knows that you're more likely to get a wonky barrel than you are get a straight one. This is just a couple of connective bits in terms of cabling by the looks of it. Not entirely sure where this will go, but they all look fine. No problems whatsoever. These what look to be the sort of the barrier sections from the back bottom of the Warlord torso. As you can see, these, I don't think anyone would quibble that these aren't straight. As well as having a few issues on the barriers themselves, they'll need smoothing out. These look to have warped fairly badly. Being thin sections, these should be fairly straightforward, but one problem we do sometimes have with these thinner bits is that when you're trying to mould them and reshape them, you end up having to do them in sections, or it's impossible to get the right shape. And then some more bits from some of the pistons that we saw earlier. These bits look okay. The actual piston bits that go inside, as you can see, have already frustrated me or annoyed me a little bit, but these bits look fine. I don't really have any problems. And there we go. There's a little bit of flash, a little bit of slip. Every single time. Every time on those pieces. I don't think I've ever had a kit with those that has not had that problem. So, just like the rest, we'll just have to sort of trim that down a little bit, get those in place. I don't really think it's a problem, but, you know, we deal with the hand that we're given. So we'll get all these pieces away, back into the bag, and we'll move on. As you can see over the rest of the shot there, I think we've got 3 or 4 bags of parts from this red box to go. Yeah, so we'll see some of the armour panels, we'll see some of the other connective bits of tissue, and go from there. So the next one here, we'll go for this bag on the right. This looks to have some armour panels in, as well as some of the bigger, chunkier bits from the hip and sort of torso sections. Bit of a mixed bag. So, move some of this stuff out of the way so we can see clearly. This, again, looks to be sort of arm or leg connective joints. Again, I think there's a bit of a ball there, so this might be part of the knee section, perhaps. I'd have to double check, obviously, with the manual and check all the parts. I've checked all the parts off, I just haven't visually memorized every single piece, of course. This is the same sort of piece, I imagine, given that there's only 2 of these. Like I said, this is arm or leg related. I can't see any issues with these. There's a little bit of kind of supplemental flash and resin gate on the top of this, but no issues that I can see there that concern me at all. These looks like the sort of the side sections off that hip plate that the torso will sit on, and then sit on the legs themselves. As you can see there, it looks like that actually might be flash in terms of under the cables there, but actually that's not. That's just thick resin. That's not a mistake. That's not part of the side effect of molding. That's just part of the resin. That's not coming out, and I'm not going to dig that out and mess up those pipes. So they are what they are. They're going to stay like that. If they go, I believe these go where I think they do, it's not really going to notice, and if anyone picks that up, I don't think they're really looking at the rest of the Titan. So looking at this sort of socket joint, again, 2 of these, fairly straightforward, no issues with the detailing on this, which is nice given, you know, the sort of the gaps that run all the way around this. That could be a bit of an annoying miscast or slippage if there was anything here, but there's a little bit on the resin gates, nothing really that concerns me a considerable amount, so I think we're fine. And we've got, I think this is the first section of some of those like kind of torso rib sections, as you imagine it. Armour, again forming part of a 2-part armour panel system that will slot just above the hips, kind of, I say, below and to the left and right of the head. No problems with these look all fine, nice and smooth, no greasy texture. They don't look like they need any reshaping, so I think they're also fine. And this is the supporting armour panel section for that. These sort of fit together in a sort of complementary fashion in terms of, you know, protecting some of that vital gubbins of the Titan. Both sides of this look fine. I don't really have any problems with this. Yeah, just have to make sure it's all clean and tidied and smooth, because I think part of this will form a leading edge that you will actually see quite a bit on the Titan as it's posed and in place. But again, there'll be a lot of this stuff getting posed and sorted separately. This, I believe, is an armour panel potentially off the sort of elbow upper arm joint of the gun arms. Again, little bits of slip on the edge of the bottom where the resin gate is, but no great problem. Similar issue on the other one I've just picked up, but you can see that flash actually remains between 2 of the bits on the gate. I don't think it's a huge issue, or, and honestly, any issue. I mean, that's just pushed out right straight away there, so there's no problem. A little bit of cutting and tidying. There's a slight edge on that, but it doesn't look to have slipped anywhere else. It might just be an issue where the mould is sort of pushed apart with that injection slightly, but you know, like I say, we deal with these bits as they come. That's all fairly slim, so it should just, with a nice sharp knife, that should come off straight away without any problems. This looks like the piece that sort of sits on the chest immediately below on that sort of head section. You can notice there on the back end it's got the 4 dots that line up to the head mount section that we saw before. Little bits of flash around the edges. Again, pretty standard across the whole model so far. I don't think I'm going to labour on those bits too much going forward, because I think we should just expect them from this point on. So again, we'll get these bits on and move on to the last 2 bags. So this one looks like it might be a fun bag. It's got some more armour panels in, but some of these armour panels look like they might actually belong to the leg section of the Titan. So the most part, as you can see, yeah, here we are. So this is from at least 1 or 2, possibly both legs. This is the sort of the forward thigh knee section that will just sort of sit slightly above the knee joint. That's got to be possibly the messiest break and join of a resin gate to any part I've seen on this Titan so far. This section feels a little bit greasier. As he says that, it slips out of his hand. Not a huge problem across this whole piece. That messy edge on the resin gate will actually be facing down, so it might not be huge, but as you can see, it kind of almost looks like that resin gate has been tried to sort of be fixed back to the piece with more resin, and it's not really worked compared to this one, where you can see that join is nice and smooth, it's clean. There's little bits of flash around some of the edges there, but yeah, the other one just looks to have been messily sort of attached to the gate. We'll have to have a little look at that to make sure there are no huge concerns with filling that edge, but again, within the realms of possible and preventable probably, but we can't do much about that. This is one of the lower leg armor sections. As you can see, there's a little bit of distortion to this. There's a bit of a bend, but not too much. We can just heat treat that out. Compared to this one that's not on the resin gate at all, this looks to be slightly more distorted. A little bit of a bend, you can see from that left hand edge as I turn it there. Yeah, there you go. You see it much better that way. That leading edge is not really particularly straight, and I think from this one you can also tell there's some slight bending. Yeah, slight bending there. Again, these larger, flatter pieces tend to be really susceptible to some of this warping. Luckily, because they're large and they're thin, doesn't make the job of shaping them back too difficult, or indeed difficult at all. To save on the kettle though, I might have to get the heat gun out just to make sure we're not having to continuously boil the kettle for different bowls of water. So this one again, slightly bent, but no problems really. Other than the slight warpage on these, there's no problem on these. I've moved straight on because they're all fairly same. And then these are the mounting bars, mounting brackets for those rib sort of hip, sort of torso armor sections, the 2 pieces that fit together. Again, this will look really familiar for anyone who's got a Warlord Titan in AT scale. These are sort of deceptively thick, chunky pieces actually, and there's a couple of little deviations and slips, but the vast majority of this will not just be attached to the torso, but also sat behind 2 armor panels on each one, so you're not going to see a huge amount of that anyway. So we'll tidy it up to make sure it's neat and clean, of course, but we don't need to sort of sand it to within an inch of its life to make sure it's smooth and shiny. So we'll get these bits away and we'll jump onto this last bag as part of this section. So here we go. I think we've got a couple of bigger pieces within this, and I think this looks like part of, yes, this is part of the rest of the sort of upper section. As you can see, this is what I think is part of the remaining piece of the actual torso bit that we're going to have to put together. Why this has been bagged up this way, I'm not sure, but as you can see, this is a really nice piece actually. There's a few sort of big chunky sort of mechanical details. There's no warping. There doesn't look to be much of an issue in terms of slippage. There's a little bit on that edge. The gates have all gone on really well, so there's no issue with that bit. Looks like we've got an armor panel again. This is the piece that sits directly above the head. I guess lore wise, to protect from any immediate incoming attack to the top of the head, but fairly standard small piece, and a little bit like some of the bits on the Reaver and the Warbringer. Let's get this piece of bloody flash off my finger. You won't actually see a lot of this. It'll be overlaid with, you know, 2 or 3 armor panels or armor sections above it. So this is more just to sort of add a bit of an edge rather than much of an edge. And then this is another piece similar to that first piece we got out of the bag. Again, with there being 2 pieces opposite sides, that leads me to believe that this is part of the torso build itself. No issues with this. There's a couple of little what look like sort of dings there, but actually it was just sort of loose flash that's come onto the model. And then the last 2 pieces, and immediately you can see a problem. We can see a problem there, can't we? So these 2 pieces, I believe, are vents for the top of the torso section. These will go at the front, so these are quite important. We've got some slight flared edges on the bottom of these, but as you can see, that chunk, that hole at the bottom below that vent, should not be there. So I don't know whether that's come off as I've been emptying the parts out to do the check. I don't know if this has happened in transit, but as you can see, the part is there. So what we've got here is a small piece that has just chipped right out of that midsection, and that's because that's actually quite a thin bit. It's a thin piece of resin. It's obviously quite brittle, and you can see on the other side what this should look like. It's not part of a gate, so it's not snapped off by accident. It just looks to have been a vulnerable part of this model. You know, it is what it is. I will have to try and fix this and work out how that will impact the overall build, but you know, I don't think that is the biggest problem in the world. It is frustrating, but it can happen with some of these molds, and some of these pieces, and it's most likely because I've been a moron and just tipped all the pieces out to initially check them. So overall, this kit has been reasonably, you know, kind of okay. I think one of the risks you run with a kit of this size is the sheer number of parts. The odds aren't really in your favour for how many are going to be okay, how many are going to have a problem, how many are going to be broken. In that last piece that we saw, how many are actually going to be broken potentially by your own hand. But here we are. That's the end of that section. So stay tuned for the rest, and if you've got any comments, just drop them below and we'll get back to you. See you later.